There's one universal truth that I've learned over my years just watching shows and engaging with fandoms online. It's that nobody hates a show more than its own fans. Nobody's going to spend their time hyper-analyzing, hating, raging, ranting, and complaining about every aspect of a piece of media more than those that claim to be the superfans. And I get it. It's very easy to be critical of stuff that you are passionate about, and thus you want to see improve. But of course, after a while, it does become a bit of a toxic wasteland where there's just universal criticism and anger, and not much positive discussion or constructive discussion and discourse. And look, I understand I am guilty of that sort of thing as much as the next person, but it's something that I do want to discuss today. That despite being a wildly popular franchise, all things considered, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, Miraculous Ladybug seems to have a very vocal dislike from a big portion of its fan base, or at least ones that talk about it online. And I kind of want to puzzle out the reason as to why this might be, because here's a spicy take. Whilst there's been some definitive fumbles over the course of seasons 4 and 5, overall, I think, on average, the quality of the show has improved as time's passed, has peaks and troughs. So, what's going on? I guess that's where we'll begin, shall we? When Miraculous Ladybug started, it was, not the beginning, and not even the peak of the superhero craze, but it was the stage where they were beginning to build to something new. 2015 to 16. Before that, we'd had some hype movies, which led into the Avengers, which was mega hype, did well at the box office, etc, etc. It was a phenomenon. But then it slowed off a bit. We got Ultron in 2015, and that was pretty big, but I think the first one that really got the ball rolling on the MCU being the biggest thing in film bar none, as in the only thing people seem to care about and talk about, and led to it just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, was Civil War. After that, it explodes to levels we haven't really seen before for a major franchise. And so, alongside that growth in hype, what was releasing its first season in that 2015 to 16 bracket? Why, it's Miraculous Ladybug, Season 1. And so, I think it was fresh, it was exciting, it was unique in its vibes for a superhero show, it had an interesting plot, and was well and truly riding that hype train of the OG MCU. And so, rather quickly, the show started to blow up. And I feel like in those early days, people were much more willing to overlook the flaws of the show. It was this kids' show that had come out of nowhere and was better than it had any right to be. And it just snowballed from there. Admittedly, it didn't have much development, and honestly, on rewatch, because I am rewatching season 1 as we speak, it is not that much to write home about, at least season 1. But it was good for what it was, and for the time it came out. And it was a great introduction to the world and to the characters. And then we came to season 2. And for me, this is probably the prime of the show's fandom. It was wildly popular, wildly successful, and with very few haters, or at least compared to now. The formula wasn't stale by this point in time, and the development, while slow, was not unbearably so. We hadn't waited as long as we had by the end of season 3. It was doing well for itself, and do you guys remember how hyped the fandom was during the Heroes Day episodes? Absolutely, the golden age, right there. And that momentum, it carried on from there into season 3, and there was a bit of discontent starting to make itself known around this point, mostly due to the really sporadic episode releases and stuff coming out of order. So you'd see things, and then the next episode doesn't address it because it hasn't happened yet. And thus, everything didn't really make that much sense. And then we had that finale. You know the one. The all-time classic stinker, Miracle Queen. Where the whole Chloe arc, which had been built for all of season 2 pretty much, was tossed in the bin and was held up by the creative team as an epic example of the failed heroic redemption, which I just think it went against a lot of what the fan base was clamoring for. But also, most of it just felt quite stale in general. We'd had so many seasons of arsehole Chloe, and it was refreshing to have a change, and then they just reverse it all. It felt like you'd been ripped off, like your time had been wasted, and nobody likes that. And then we came into season 4, and I'll be real, there was some really good writing here. The way some things played out was garbage, e.g. the alternate ships, and Cat Noir well and truly being relegated into the sidekick position, that sucked. But there was a whole lot of awesome stuff there too to balance it out. Same with season 5. They had a lot of shit moments, don't get me wrong, and they fumbled the bag spectacularly, messing up a lot of long-term storylines and character arcs finishes. But at the same time, there were such high highs as well. And overall, the quality of the writing, the dialogue, the action, it all improved. And all of the specials they've made outside of the actual confines of the episodic show have been veritable bangers, like really good and really well received. And so it does make me wonder if overall, a lot of the aspects of the storytelling, the design, the animation, the narrative flow, the dialogue, character development, if they've across the board improved over time season to season, why is the negativity so much higher than the old days? And so I did come to a couple of conclusions. The first is probably honestly the most dismissive of all, so stick with me for a minute. But people do get stuck in their ways hating on something. So when the show first started putting out stuff that was unpopular, it fouled the water, so to speak, and poisoned a lot of people against the show. And so now, even when the show does something right, these people find themselves unable to give it props. After all, they'd been burned before, and thus, they still only hunt down and overemphasize the negatives. And this ties into my next point. The world, or rather, the fandom, genuinely seems to have a massive hate bone for Thomas Astruc. They can't resist tagging him and shit, or sending him bait or straight out hate comments on Twitter. Oh, sorry, X. Oh, for God's sake. Elon has so much to answer for changing that name. Anyway, they can't resist, and he can't resist replying, because of course he can't. And it all turns into a toxic cesspit of cringe. They tell him why something sucks, and then they also insult him and tell him he's a trash writer, and he explains why it doesn't suck, and he insults them and calls them trash people, and actually often insults them for even watching the show to begin with. And on it goes in an endless loop until the sun expands and everybody gets vaporized. And I think this does set people against the show and him, as even when the flaws are real and genuine, he never seems able to admit to it, and it makes him look like a dweeb. Let's be honest, dude seems like a massive dweeb at times. Like, come on, you do not have to reply to every troll. Just block and move on, son. Block and move on. Oh, but he doesn't, and so it gets bigger and bigger than it needs to be, and it ends up everywhere, Reddit, X, whatever, and it sours people on everything he does, and thus makes the show look worse by comparison. But I do realize that some of these reasons come across as almost blaming the fandom for everything, which I don't think is fair. And nor do I think it's all that accurate if I'm being perfectly honest with you, because there is one reason more than any other that I think the negativity about the show remains so strong despite such improvement across the board. Despite more rapid development from a character progression and a storyline perspective. And it's that whilst the overall presentation has improved across all aspects, the lows have never been lower. So you can have these banger episodes that set up characters like Felix as power players. They set up cool shit for Lila to do this season and beyond. They showed the development of the relationship between Marinette and Adrian at long last as they become a romantic couple. Only for them to serve up absolute trash on a plate, forcing you to eat a shit sandwich. Luca being shuffled out the door for no reason in Season 5 when he has that important knowledge, making his Season 4 arc mean literally nothing. Adrian becoming a loser crybaby who wasn't even involved in the grand finale where he fights the main villain. His own father. He gets shuffled out the door and Marinette does it all. Ugh. The weird ending for Chloe and the redemption of Andre. Ugh. And that's just some cherry-picked moments from Season 5. And in the end, I think it proves something. That fans, well, they don't necessarily need hugely complex and convoluted storytelling. It just needs to be good, but it also never has to hit those high highs. I think most people would prefer to watch a show that at the end of the day is, yeah, it's okay, it's alright, I like it. It's nothing bad about it, it's just average. Rather than watch a show that is mostly awesome, or awesome in some aspects, and then has moments where it shits the bed so bad. And that's the case here. Miraculous could be so much better. Like, it already hits such high highs at times, and then they fumble it. And when they fumble it, they fumble hard. And so now instead of feeling, yeah, all good, you feel way more disappointed than you normally would because you'd gotten more invested because it was a better quality show at points. And this culminates in the state of the fandom today, where there's a lot of disdain for the writing because at times, whilst it can be great, they then serve you up something like the finale and you think, I have spent years of my life watching the show and this is how they wrap up the big arc? Really? God damn it. And so ultimately, the fault lies with the creative team. A bad show gets forgotten pretty much instantly. An average show is enjoyed, like it was during its first couple of seasons. But a show where you can see it would be so good and it was so good and then they just keep screwing it up at crucial moments, that builds the rage and the vitriol, and that's what we see today. Game of Thrones is yet another obvious example of that. And so, yeah, I think that's probably why so many people hate on the show, and yet they manage to stick around and keep watching, because you can see the promise, but in the end, the writers need to stop making the worst possible decisions in those crucial areas. Time for a reset in Season 6. Back to the drawing board. And so, yeah, with all that being said, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about what I've said? Do you agree with me? Disagree? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.